Welcome to Living in St. John's. My name is Caitlin Blosser and I'm a local realtor in St. John's, Florida. And today I wanted to make a video to kind of explain to you not just who I am, but also who I was as a home buyer. My husband and I have had the privilege of buying about 5 homes over the last 9 years. So just kind of want to walk you through each home, each situation we were put in, because some of them I wasn't a realtor when we made that decision, and to kind of walk you through the ins and outs so that if you're moving to St. John's, whether you already live here, you're looking at it from afar, you kind of see who I am and how we got here. So to start, me and my husband, we were dating at the time, but we were one of those people, I think it's like 84% of people in their young 20s buy a home because they have a dog, and we were one of those. We were renting at the beach. Our landlord then did not, in Jacksonville Beach, our landlord then did not allow dogs. We were at the point in our relationship where we wanted one, so we decided to find another rental that did allow dogs. But the problem is, once we moved in, we were like, hey, we're ready to get a dog. What do? That landlord was like, sorry, we don't allow dogs anymore. So we were stuck. And we were like, guess we got to buy a house, right? Like, if we own a house, no one can tell us whether we have a dog or not. We were dating at the time, and it was one of those, like, buying a house is going to be a lot of money, but we really want a dog. We knew we were serious enough. And it was one of those, like, do we put all this money towards a house or towards a wedding? And we had a lot of friends getting married, so we knew the cost. But we just decided we'd rather put the money towards a house and marriage could come later, which kudos to me for thinking that way. So then began our house journey. I was a teacher at the time, which is one thing I love about real estate is I still get to teach people daily, just about homes, not about math. But I was a teacher at the time, and we really had no idea what we were doing. Our realtor was great. Our loan officer was great, but we were just like 24, 25 years old, just like looking at houses, not really understanding the process. We knew we wanted to stay in the East. I called it East Arlington. Now that I'm a realtor, they call it west of the Intercoastal. We knew the area we wanted to stay in. We kind of knew what we wanted, but we were kind of winging it. And one of the biggest mistakes we made at the beginning is when we got pre-approved. They told us what our pre-approval was. And then when we saw what the monthly payments were, we were like, what? Like, so mind blown, because we knew, like, we're like, I know you say we can afford that, but like, I don't think we can afford that, because we really wanted a mortgage payment that was similar to our rent payment. So after looking at houses in that price point, and then seeing the numbers, we were like, let's take it back a notch. So we went back to our loan officer, kind of told them like, hey, this is really what we want to spend. So what budget do we need to stay in? And from that experience alone, that's why I always tell people to work backwards. And that first conversation you have with a lender needs to be not just what do I qualify for, but this is what my payment needs to be. So what budget is that? So lesson number 1 I learned when we bought our first house, because it's just like wedding dress shopping. You never shop for something out of your budget, because then when you have to get into your budget, it's disappointing. But moral of the story, we found a house that we loved. Once we went under contract, we bought the dog, just didn't tell our landlord, and then moved in to our new home with our dog. We were in that home for 2 years and we loved it. We painted the shutters, we put in floors. I want to say it was built in the early 2000s. So we did do a lot. We had to paint a lot. We had to put in LVP everywhere. We like redid the laundry room. It was such a fun first house. There was a lot of projects, but we loved it. We were young. We got married. We had the time to do all the projects. And then we found out through my husband's job, and that's the other thing, buying our first house unmarried is what made us get in a tax accountant, because we were like, how do we file taxes now that we bought a house? Like, do you claim the house? Do I claim the house? So you can buy a house not married with a person and share ownership, and I can walk you through all of that. But so we got married. My husband's job moved us to Georgia. So this was our second buying experience, and it was one of those of like, we have no idea we've bought a house before. I was still a teacher at the time, but I was getting my real estate license. So it was one of those, like, when you're in school and you learn things, but like once you go out in the real world and actually do it, it's like, they don't teach you what you need to know. That's where I was when we moved to Georgia. I knew like the book knowledge of real estate, but I didn't know the like actual what I was doing. And it was a different state, so some things were different. So my husband gets the call that we're moving to Georgia. We had about 6 weeks to do it. And so it was one of those, like, we'd see houses, we knew budget this time, and we'd pick out like 12 houses that we'd want to see on Saturday. And we'd drive up to Georgia, which we kind of just took advice from his coworkers on where to live. And we'd drive up there, and then by the time we'd get there, like only 3 or 4 houses would be left. Everything else would go under contract. The market was just very competitive at that time. So we'd get up there, and of course, like, the houses we did not want to see or were kind of lowest were the only ones left. So that was disappointing. And we had 2 Great Danes now. We bought 2 dogs in our last house. So it was something we just knew we didn't want to rent. We didn't want to deal with that. And we wanted to, in those 6 weeks, get up there and move into a house. So it was a little frustrating. And it was one of those, again, we didn't know the areas. We'd go up, we'd drive, we'd really just house hunt, and then we'd come back for work on Monday. So after a couple of weeks, we ended up just going the new construction route. We found a spec home, so a home that was already built, ready to go by a builder, put an offer in, which new construction, there's only so much you can negotiate with, but it was there, it was ready, and we moved in. And we love that house. And although, again, I was getting my real estate license, I had no idea about new construction. So with new construction, the week before, you go and you get to like mark up the walls, put tape, like say everything that's wrong, paint, things like that, and they fix it for you. And I just thought that was the coolest thing ever, and I still think it's pretty cool, even though I see it all the time now. But it was a relief. Like, in that house, we got to personalize and make our own, but we didn't have to rip up the flooring. We didn't have to repaint the rooms because the paint job before was bad. So we bought a spec home. We ended up loving the area. Definitely once we were there, I learned a lot. Like, I got into real estate and really got to see all the areas. And there was just different things about Georgia that I was not used to in Florida. And funny story, where we're at in North Florida, Duval County and St. Johns County taxes pay for your garbage. Where in Georgia, you shop for your garbage, which now that I'm back in Florida and I get buyers from out of town, that's always a question. And I still find it funny to today, because in Georgia, like, you can shop your garbage company. And then another thing was that I did not know is water was completely separate. In Jacksonville and St. Johns, you have JEA, which covers your electric, water, sewer, all of that. So when we moved to Georgia, I just turned our electric on, and about 8 months into owning the home, we got a not so nice letter from our builder that was like, hey, you never switched the water over. You owe us XYZ, get it in your name or else you're about to be waterless. So that was also a life lesson. But we got it figured out, and it was okay. So fast forward, we lived in Georgia for 2 years, and I was a realtor for 2 years as a buyer's agent in Georgia, and I loved it, and I really understood the process. So when my husband got the call that his job was moving us back to Jacksonville, I was finally going to buy my own home, knowing what I was doing. But it was tricky. We were moving back, and we knew kids were on the horizon, and we were like, do we move back to what we know in Jacksonville, that same area that we loved, that we still had a lot of friends, or do we make the move to St. Johns? And we quizzed all of our friends, because we were like, we don't want to move back to Jacksonville. And then within a year, all of our friends leave us. So we quizzed everyone, and everyone said they were staying in Jacksonville. But we decided to make the move to St. Johns. Like I said, we knew kids were coming. We didn't know I was pregnant at the time, which I was. But we wanted to move to St. Johns for the reputation for the school. My aunt and uncle moved to St. Johns back in the late 90s, early 2000s, and just watching it develop the way it did, the neighborhoods just seem so involved. It's just a very family-friendly place. And so when we moved back, we made the leap down to St. Johns. Or we knew we wanted to live there. We didn't make the leap yet. So when we moved to when we started house shopping, St. Johns is heavy in new construction. We had already bought a spec home before, and so that door was open. But again, his company moves him quickly. We had 2 Great Danes, and we knew we wanted something. So we looked at resale first, and just didn't love what we were seeing. And we opened that door to new construction and realized that new construction was very competitive in pricing. And again, when you're comparing a home from like the early 2000s to something brand new, there's just something to be said about knowing you're walking in with something new. We looked at spec homes and just nothing checked off all of our boxes. So we made the decision to build from the ground up. And I learned patience more than anything. I've helped so many buyers purchase new construction, build from the ground up. But again, it's something to be said when you're in those shoes. So we moved in with my mom, our 2 dogs. I found out I was pregnant like 2 weeks later, and we were like, what are we doing? We had put everything in storage. And we lived with my mom for 6 or 7 months. And that's the other thing, learning patience. Obviously, the build time our builder gave us was not too accurate, but that's okay. And so I learned the ins and outs on the buyer side of picking out your lot, picking out your finishes, picking out your structural changes, watching it go up, making sure what you're paying for is what's being put in, and learned that process. We're still in this house today. And then over the last 3 years, we've bought into investment properties. And that's another thing where I've helped so many buyers buy investment properties, and I know the numbers, and I know like you plug it in a spreadsheet, tells you if it's worth it, rent versus mortgage, things like that. Underlying costs you might not know about, like empty months where you might not have a tenant because you're finding a new tenant, costs to flip after one tenant moves out and moves in. And I've helped people make decisions that they were so happy with, but when we were in the shoes of the investor and it was our money putting out, again, I got that feeling of, okay, if I'm doing it, it has to be right. And so I followed the same methods I help other buyers do. But again, I finally got to be in those shoes of the investor. So we bought into investment properties, and then we still own that new construction house. So that's a little bit about me and my home buying journey, and you learning about me as a home buyer and learning about moving to an area where I knew nothing, the differences in things state to state, buying a spec home, buying a new construction home, building from the ground up, buying a resale, and everything that goes into it. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Go ahead and subscribe. Stick around as I'm done talking about me, and I'm going to start talking and telling you all about St. John's, why I love it, and the differences between Jacksonville and here. So thank you.